For those of you that like to read the comments in a lot of our engine videos, you'll notice that there's always a comment or two about the blue B13 in the background. So here we are today to tell you more about our Nissan B13 SE-R. Many of you may or may not know, but really here at MotoIQ, we're all a bunch of Nissan heads, or at least that's where we started off as. Mainly the Nissan Sentra SE-R, actually. I met Mike and Jeff because of this car. My first car was a 99, well, I'll take you back a little bit further back than that. My first car was a 1992 Nissan Sentra. It was a blue two-door E model, which is nothing power, everything was manual, 4-speed, and it also had the GA16 engine. And I always kept reading about this SE-R model, which had a bigger engine, dual overhead cams, and it was a sportier model. So in 1999, I bought myself a 4-door Nissan Sentra SE-L, and that was my baby. And that's how I came to meet the SE-R Club of America, or Circa, and these guys were just all track dudes, and it led me to making my SE-L a little non-streetable. I had very lopey cams, and I was trying to get faster suspension. So slowly but surely, I needed a daily driver, and I'm like, hey, well, why not go find a B13? And that's exactly what I did. I bought this B13. It's supposed to be my let's not mod it, keep it stock SE-R daily driver, and little before we knew it, it became a full-on project car. So that's what we have back here. And as you guys know, Mike used to write for Sport Compact Car and had a B14 of himself. He had another B13 SE-R, a couple B14 race cars. So if anything, he's a bit of a SE-R guru himself.
So the interesting thing about the B13 was the B13 was kind of a nondescript compact car made by Nissan, but it was a really pretty neat car. Like kind of looked like a mini E30, so it had nice, clean, kind of classic looks. The base models were powered by a GA16 engine, which was like, a base engine, pretty pedestrian, not too exciting. But for once, Nissan did something cool, and they dropped the SR20 engine from the S-chassis Nissan. So they dropped a naturally aspirated version in the B13 chassis, completing it with four-wheel disc brakes, a limited slip differential, and about 140 horsepower, which was a lot back then. You know, this was competing against the Civics and the basic Integras, and it outperformed them all. Maybe it didn't handle as good, but it was a hot rod and it had Indeed. Good power. So some of these characteristics endeared it to a whole bunch of us. I know myself, I kind of liked it because it was like a big sleeper. You know, here was the Sentra, and nobody even heard of SE-Rs, but it had this honking SR20 in it, and it was really fun to drive.
I have to agree. I mean, that was actually one of the reasons why I chose the Nissan instead of a Honda. It was 1999, early 2000s when I got into the SE-R game, and you know, everyone had their Hondas, their Hatchies, you know, single jingle cam, and I just didn't want to do what everybody else did. And that's why I went the Nissan Sentra route, especially considering that I just randomly ran into having my first car be an E model that was a hand-me-down from an aunt of mine. But I guess a lot of the SE-R guys are kind of the same quirky dudes that just didn't like to do things the cookie cutter way, I guess. Because a lot of us were a bunch of nerds with kind of the same characteristics.
Yeah, I think we're all like engineers, or we had a tech background, most of us, and I guess we didn't want to be like the Honda guys, because the Hondas were great cars at the time, probably the best compact cars of that era. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, there's a bunch of like people that kind of like hacked them up. I mean, the term ricer was developed to describe these Honda owners. So your typical Honda guy had a big old fart can exhaust, and it was loud and shitty and gaudy and kind of lame, and you know, like I know myself, I knew that the Hondas had the potential to be better, but I just didn't want to be lumped in with, I guess, the masses or something.
The rest of the racer crowd, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess SER guys are kind of like how Subaru guys are now.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with that. I mean, I do remember that the first thing that I noticed was I remember going to my first SCR meet with my four-door Sentra, and I was all stoked about having a 12-inch sub in the back and tweeters and had like extra P of fog lamps, thinking I was all sweet. And then I met all you guys, and all your cars are basically bone stock looking on the outside. Everybody had a track suspension or talking about bigger brakes. I'm like, what is all this track stuff you talk about? And then finally I did my first track and I was hooked, man. And so yeah, definitely a different crowd. But again, this little car brought a lot of us together, man, to where well, I'm still friends with a lot of my old SER friends, actually. A lot of them, man. But that's enough history of how we got into this. But let's take you through our little car here. Where should we start? The engine, suspension? Where do you think we should start?
Let's talk about the engine, because I mean, this car, there's so much more that meets the eye. I mean, this is a really cool car, even though it looks like a pretty stock Sentra. And why don't you talk about the engine?
Okay. Well, we'll start with, again, we originally had a SR20DE. When the opportunity came to put a VE in it, that's what we did. So it's got an SR20V engine. It has the long rod setup that you and Chuck Johnson, spec'd out. Maybe talk about that and why that came to be. Why we went with the long rod and...
Well, I'll back up a little bit more. Like the SR20, you know, after the version that was the U.S. domestic market one, Nissan didn't bring any more of the cool versions. In Japan, they continued to develop the motor, so they came out with the SR20 VE, which was sort of like Nissan's answer to the VTEC B-Series Honda motors, but one better. So it basically has something like VTEC, where you have a third lobe that gives more lift and more duration, that gets hydraulically locked in when commanded by the ECU. So you have the smooth idle, the drivability, and the torque of a low RPM lobe, and the power and high revving capability of a high RPM lobe. It also, the rockers are on the shaft, so it gets rid of the SR20 problem of spinning the rockers. Also, the cylinder head, the ports are like designed with more modern technology, so the head flowed a lot better. So these engines had great power potential, and you know, back in the day, it was kind of exotic if you did one of these swaps, but it is a really cool swap. So what we did is one of the things about the SR, it has kind of a poor stroke to rod length ratio. So for Martin's car, we wanted to build a version that could rev. So we used a longer rod out of a Honda H motor. We made a custom JE piston, and we really improved the stroke to rod length ratio. So this engine, it just revs really well, and it's really smooth at high RPM. It's kind of like a B-Series, like a B16 Honda engine. You know, like if you ever driven one, they rev really, really well, and they're really smooth at high RPMs. So is Martin's engine.
Absolutely, and not only that, we also took the time to take a lot of the small intricacies inside of the engine. So for example, the crank scraper that the engine has, so we had to clearance the upper oil pan a little bit for that. So it's got a knife edged and balanced crank as well. What else do we have in this? So that's, I guess that's the block and the bottom end of it.
And then we used the windage tray. Like these engines kind of have oil temperature issues, and a lot of that is the counterweights of the crank. When you're driving around the track, they actually hit the oil in the pan and they froth it up, so the oil temp goes up really quick. They also have a lot of windage because the regular version has a hydraulic valve train, so a lot of oil is pouring down on the crank. So we actually put a crank scraper to scrape away that windage cloud, and a windage tray to put all the oil back in the pan quicker.
Yep.
We also have, the pistons are 11-to-1, and that's about the most you want to go on California pump gas. We ported and polished the head. The head is pretty good stock, but we took it to the next level. Slightly oversized valves, ported and polished, and we used N1 cams on it.
Yes, sir. And N1 cams, and As far as the valve train goes, that's really all we did to the valve train. But I mean, we did do a full DPR port job from no longer around. But so I guess that's kind of a bit of a relic now.
The N1 cams was the cams used on Nissan's limited production racing N1 SR20V N1, and that was in a car that was used in Group N racing, so it was a homologation special kind of deal. They had to sell a couple thousand or something, I think, to qualify for that racing class.
Oh, to get the part.
Yeah. So this is actually a pretty darn aggressive cam, and it was the hottest cam for these engines until Kelford recently came out with some cams that have more juice. But for many years, it was the
one to go to.
Yeah, and you know, it has pretty impressive numbers. Like I think it has, I mean, I'm just pulling this off the top of my head, but 290 degrees duration and something like 12 millimeters lift, which is pretty darn big for a stock cam.
I will take your word for it. It's been a long time.
It's been a long time. I could be
this.
slightly off, but it's something like that.
And with that said, I mean, it has been a long time since this engine was built. This car's been being driven for now over 50,000 miles, over 10 years, multiple track days, and it's been a solid build. Now, speaking of how long ago we built it, even the engine management, so it's got a Jim Wolf ECU, custom tuned by Clark over there at Jim Wolf Technologies in San Diego. But back then, we needed different ways of being able to even activate the VTEC or the VVL in this Nissan. And the way we're doing it is through a Greddy MSS, which you can basically switch over the crossover whenever you want. But as you'll see in the dyno charts we'll put on here, I mean, once the big cam kicks in, there is no sort of, ramp of power. It's a very linear power band that when Clark was able to tune it.
Yeah, like there's none of that VTEC kicked in, yo.
There's definitely an audible difference when VTEC kicks in, but it is not a, oh my God, like it's from your bud dyno feel.
So this engine's like really smooth, really refined. The Honda B series didn't have any torque, but this engine has torque and it revs like crazy.
Yeah. And it's happy up there. That's another thing. I mean, when I've been taking it to track days, this thing is living at the high RPM all the time. Unfortunately, like we talked about, SRs are, their Achilles heel is oil temps and water temps too, but just temps in general. So this could definitely benefit from a solid oil cooler setup. As of right now, once you're out there at the track, you can get a solid 3 hard laps before you have to start, dialing it down a little bit before the oil temps get too crazy. Now, talking about oil temps and why you want to control that is because of the bearings you have in there. This does have ACL race bearings, so we can push that a little bit more, but you don't want to get too crazy with the oil temps. Now, as far as intake goes, stock intake manifold, we port matched it to the head. That's all we did. Just a warm air 3-inch intake with the Jim Wolf Technology pop charger. And then also the SR20VE header, which is from a 20V Primera, from Europe, the G20 out there, the P12, I want to say it is. So it's got a 3, and then a custom secondary, which is a 3-inch downpipe that goes all the way back to the 3-inch exhaust it has as well.
So this is a stock manifold, but it's actually like a tubular header. It has like really big primaries, and it's like a long tube tri-line configuration, and the stock manifold makes probably more power than any of the common aftermarket headers.
Right, it made more than what back in the day was the Hot Shot header,
and all those copycats and the Stillen header. I mean, like way more power than those. And the only way to beat it was like a custom, custom Dundon Motorsports header or something like that, which was like $3,000 or something.
Absolutely.
And so if you couldn't afford the Dundon header, this was the way to go. And I mean, it was like maybe 5 horsepower less or something. It wasn't that much.
No, not at all. But definitely the best performing header for the value.
And it also has really good ground clearance.
That I have to disagree with.
Oh, really?
We'll show you some B-roll on this, and it's been clearanced by the cross member. Yeah, like it always hung down a little bit lower than the cross member, so whenever you hit something in the front, that downpipe would take the hit.
I don't think it's as bad as like the Dundon with the 4-into-1 collector and.
Likely not, because obviously that's where you get your extra power, from the longer tubes and whatnot. But with this one, even though it's as big and as tight as you can get that curve to go to the back into the exhaust, and unfortunately that stick out a little bit more.
I had to build a skid plate for mine.
I remember that on your race car. I had that big old piece of steel hanging out on the bottom. So that's really the engine, and though it made 195 wheel horsepower in the Jim Wolf Dynapack. Again, this is over a decade ago. On our Heartbreaker dyno, as of July of this year, it made 165 to the wheel. So it's probably done about 10, 15 horsepower since it was originally built, which is to be expected. I mean, it's a ton of miles that we put on this car.
And I think, like, for instance, the SR20 VE in the dog car made 215 horsepower on another dyno. Mm-hmm. And I actually think this engine has more power. So
maybe definitely under the curve. It's definitely a little torquey. I remember driving that your VE, and it had a ton of power up top, but down low wasn't that.
But I always
saucy.
felt that this motor was better, and like, don't let that dyno number make you think it sucks or anything. I mean, I felt like it had more power than a 215 to the wheels motor. So. Yeah, it's all relative, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. In the hands of a good driver, I mean, you're going to have a ton of fun in this car. And so now that we're talking about that, let's talk about the suspension a little bit, which is probably the worst part of owning a B13 is that McPherson front strut suspension, which doesn't compare at all to what a DC2 Integra or a wishbone suspension front car is.
I mean, the problem with these things is they have no wheel travel. So if you lower them at all, you're on the bump stops, and that sucks. So, we developed special shorter struts, and what that does is it puts the suspension into the zone where it has a whole bunch of bump steer.
And in the rear, puts it in the place where it's kind of binding a little bit.
Yeah,
too,
the rear suspension is in bind, and you're actually having pro squat. So when you hit the brakes, the back of the car rears
wants
up.
to. And for you guys that are familiar with B13s or NX2000s, you know about that three-wheel motion around tight turns that everybody gets.
So this has some Feels coilovers, and I actually think, like, Odie at Feels makes the best off-the-shelf suspension for these.
Especially because you can talk to him about custom, spring rates and whatnot, and since they build them there, they can tune it to your liking.
And, like, if we really wanted to, we can revise the rear suspension geometry to, get rid of the bind and get rid of the Pro Squad in the back. We
were thinking of, putting a drop link on that parallel link, to maybe just drop it back to a more neutral position.
And that would make a load of difference, but it's a street car, so we don't care that much. You have all energy and white line bushings in here, right?
All white line bushings, the motorsports ones, and then not only that, it also has Progress sway bars, which are the biggest sway bars you could buy for this car.
And those are the best sway bars.
What else suspension-wise?
I think you relocated your.
Yes, we did the 2J Racing.
The roll center correction and bump steer correction.
And
parts.
that by far, we didn't do a video on that, but it's a good time to talk about it. That 2J Racing kit, man, like it transformed the way this car turned in. It turning in was a little bit slower and soggier. Now it's because the Momo steering wheel I have in there is actually a little bit smaller than stock diameter, so it's a little quicker. And now with that on top of that, it is. You can actually get yourself in trouble on the street, but on the track, it's amazing, man. This thing it's great as far as turn in and feel and the way you can manipulate it. No, it's not the best handling car, and I think everybody that drives front wheel drive cars knows that, but it's just the fun driver's car now.
I mean, shoot, This is one of the only SERs probably that doesn't understeer that much.
Yeah, it still does, but yeah, not as much.
You have to kind of make it understeer. And you can actually get the car to rotate really easily.
And then other than that, as far as brake package, we just have the AD22VF brake upgrade, which is the brakes from an NX2000 from the same chassis of this car, just bolts right on. So you get a bigger rotor, a much more thicker rotor, which is the important part, and the bigger caliper. Rears were already rear discs, and those are stock. And when I go to the track, I do change the brake package. So right now I'm on just a regular, I believe they're old power slot rotors that I have in the front with Access Metal Master pads. For you old school dudes, you'll know what that is. But then when I go to the track, I put the G-Lock race pads in there, and that just gives me that little extra oomph I need to be able to get by the faster cars on the braking zones.
And I think if we really cared, we'd probably get a fast brakes big brake kit with
The new stop stick caliper you could use with
with
the fast
stock
brake kit.
stop stick caliper, and then you probably wouldn't have to change pads for the track.
Exactly, but absolutely. But we're not going to develop the car very much anymore, as it'll be going to a new owner soon. But we'll get into that later. Now, so we've talked about brakes, we talked suspension, we talked engine. What else do we need to talk about? I guess we'll take you a little bit around the cosmetics of the car, maybe a little.
Oh, what kind of exhaust do you have?
Oh, the exhaust. So custom 3-inch exhaust, and the cool part about it is that it has an X-Force muffler on it, 3-inch X-Force muffler that has the not the automatic, but the electronic valve to open and close it. And the really cool thing is that even when it's open, yes, the car is loud, but it's not annoying. It doesn't drone. It's still 3 inches all the way straight through muffler, so no power loss. But I will say that when you close that little valve, man, and this thing is not happy when VVL kicks in and that thing's closed.
I know these things overheat, SRs tend to, and what'd you do about the cooling?
Cooling-wise, we not only upgraded the radiator to a Koyo radiator, which unfortunately is no longer available, but that's what it has, a Koyo Racing radiator, and we also did the larger water pump pulley from G-Spec. So G-Spec has which is even a little bit bigger than the N1 water pump pulley. So you do have to clearance your oil pump a little bit for the clearance, but that just slows down the water pump and prevents cavitation at higher RPM, and that helps tremendously.
One of the problems we found is that these SRs, the water pump cavitates at about 6,500 RPM. So the best way to fix it is to slow down the water pump.
Yep. Now, no oil cooler like we mentioned, so that's really the end of the cooling upgrade. It's just a bigger radiator, the water pump pulley,
And if we're going to get into it, we'd probably put a cooler on here.
Right, or just additional cooling, kind of like what we've done on our SR powered race cars, which maybe we'll do a video on that later. If there's enough of you that are interested in that, we could talk more about the G20. But for a street car, it's plenty enough cooling.
And what I like about this car is, man, it's fun to drive.
Yeah.
Like, I like the seating position. You sit pretty upright. So the door sills and the dash are low, and you can see really good.
And it's an analog car. That's the best part about it. It doesn't have a bunch of electronic doodads or suspension help mods. Nothing. You have your stick shift. You have your throttle. It's throttle by cable still, not throttle by wire.
I really like the pedal position, the steering wheel, the shifter position. You feel really comfortable in these cars.
You mentioned that it felt a lot like your Evo 9. You were telling me that.
Like when you sit in the Evo, you almost, or the older Evos, you feel like, oh wow, this is exactly like an SE-R. So
just much faster and better.
But when you get in one of these cars, you feel like, and not too many cars feel like that. So I think the driving position and everything is really good.
Yep. So I guess another thing to talk about, wheel package, Kosei K1s, 15x7s, Rapid 205 5015, Nitto NT 555s. And then for our track package, we have a set of T37s with the new Falcon RT660s, which are just amazing. Those paired with the G-Lock race pads that we were running, I mean, couldn't ask for more, man. It's basically a nice Swiss Army knife of vehicles now. I mean, granted that yes, I have to switch rotors and pads because the street pads and the street rotors just aren't. The street pad compound isn't enough out on the track for sure. At least not with my driving skill.
But it's a really fun car, and yeah, it's a shame you're selling it.
Yeah, but I have other SR20 powered cars, and now this will bring on our new '99 Sentra SE-R project, which you'll be seeing soon, which we're going to do a full engine build on. Basically, try to make it one of the baddest ass B14s around. It's going to have, well, we're not even. That's as much as the tease as you're going to get. You'll just have to tune in and see what we do with the rest of that project. Cosmetic-wise, we have the Tsuru front headlights and front bumper kit with the 4 foggies down here.
Want to explain what a Tsuru is?
Yeah, so the Tsuru, if you go to Mexico and you go look at some taxi cabs, that's basically what you're going to see. A bunch of Sentras that are called Tsurus out there in Mexico, and they made them till, I believe, like 2005 or some crazy number
something like that.
So they had a bunch of cosmetic facelifts, which were great for us because we get the upgraded headlights, you know, the better looking front bumpers. Granted that I guess these are not USDM bumpers, so they are a little bit shorter, so they won't pass US crash tests, but whatevs.
So the Mexican taxi front end is the cool.
It is. I guess, yeah, that's so funny. Actually, I took this car to TJ once, and a bunch of people were commenting, "Oh, hey, is that a taxi?" Like, oh man.
People kept on trying to jump in.
Jump in the car. Gotta get back to the States. What else? Carbon fiber hood. And that's what it had, but it's now old and it gets foggy. I guess it could be saved at one point. The paint TK3 sapphire blue for those of you in the know. But as well, just like the hood though, in sad shape on the tops. That's the shitty part, man, about paint jobs, man. You do not know what you're paying for until like year 5, year 6, when things start peeling and the clear coat starts breaking down. I paid twice to get this car painted, man, and yeah, the side looks nice, but yeah, the tops look like shit.
But you know what? Like, if you just repainted this car, and if you did a few things like, like put the latest brakes on.
No, yeah.
And we did some of our suspension tweaks, like some of the geometry correction, and now this thing can go and whoop some ass still.
Yeah. I mean, it still whoops ass in its current state, but it could definitely put the hurt on some newer cars. Yeah, we did a couple more tweaks here and there. It definitely has the potential, but I got to focus on other projects. So again, hope you guys like this video or like learning about our history with Nissan Sentra SE-Rs.
And you guys could quit saying, what's that blue B13 in the comments in every video. Now you know everything about it.
Yeah, but let us know in the comments what project car you'd like us to do another little video on. I think some of you guys are interested as to why we have our project cars or why we even decided to start these project cars. So let us know what you want to see next. Like Mike alluded to, yes, no more development for the B13 SE-Rs. It is now going to a new owner. Thankfully, the owner's first car was a Nissan Sentra SE-R, and now he is getting in his older age and he wants to get another one. So I'm glad it's going to a good home. I'm sure it'll be taken care of. It's now time for me to part ways with it and move on to my SEL project. So stay tuned for that. Again, let us know what you like in the comments, what project cars you want us to feature on here on our project car stories. And please subscribe, tell your friends all about us, and we'll see you around.